Bigger speakers are better if they are the same quality, even in smaller rooms. It all starts with finding the best position in the room because it really matters. And it should be done before you finalize the room treatment.
Can you give us some examples of what can happen if you don't treat your room?
I know that some people like headphones with a low-end boost just because they're missing the feeling of low-end from speakers. And so they like headphones that give them a little more than there actually is just because it feels a little better to them. I personally think it's a good idea to get something with a pretty flat frequency response. That is just true. If you're just doing timing edits, you can do those on speakers. If you want to do like more detailed edits, so you hear the artifacts, headphones are much better because you can miss a lot of details on speakers, honestly, in editing.
I saw this Spanish producer who went to a studio and used socks and put them on the hose, so I did.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go.
Monitoring. I can't believe we haven't done an episode on this one yet. We're like 283 episodes in, and this is the first real episode on monitoring. I can't believe it. Because monitoring is by far the most important gear-related topic there is, and actually the only one that really matters when it comes to gear. So this is long overdue, so I'm very excited to do this today. Why does this matter? Well, because everything you do is going to go through that filter, which is your speakers or your headphones, or the speakers and the room, I should say. Every decision is going to be influenced by that, so that is why it matters. And it's the one area where I see people mess up a lot, prioritizing the wrong things, using what they have incorrectly, not getting the most of it, or just having a bad time deciding what to get and how to set it up in the first place. So this is why we need to do this episode today. And as always, I'm not by myself here. I am doing this with my friend and co-host, Manel Espinosa Berenguer from Spain. Welcome, my friend.
Hello, Benedict. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. And I noticed one thing that I didn't tell you for weeks.
Okay.
And that is that you joined the mustache family.
Oh, wow. You're right, yeah. I mean, it's been an on and off thing. But yeah, I think I'm going to stick with it for a while. We'll see if that's true next week. I don't know.
Well, anyways, for you guys that don't know about me, I'm Manel Espinosa, and I'm a music producer and mixing engineer from Spain. And I'm always happy to help you guys with your songs and also take your songs to a better place.
I'm always waiting for the next level thing. I hate it so much, but a better place is better. Yeah. No, absolutely. He will take your songs to the next level and to a better place and all of that. I can confirm. If you're new to the show, hey, hello, welcome. I'm the host, Benedict Hein, or one of the co-hosts. We are two, obviously. I am a mixing engineer, been doing full production, like recording, editing, mixing, mastering, the whole thing for about 10 years or so. And then the last 5 years, I've transitioned into just mixing only. So it's been 15 years of doing this professionally. Roughly, the last 5 of which have been specializing on mixing. I've worked on, I just not really counted, but did a broad, big picture kind of overview of all the projects I've done. And I think it's close to 3,000 songs that I've mixed, which is kind of crazy, or that I've worked on in some capacity. And yeah, there's a lot of experience, obviously, that comes from that, from mixing thousands of songs for hundreds of artists and labels from all over the world. I have 660 or something credits to my name officially on Muso, if you want to look them up, verified credits. It's probably way more than that, but individual projects. Muso says it's 660 or so. Millions of streams, millions of video views. So I like to think that I know what I'm talking about. I'm just saying these things so that you know why you should actually listen to us. And so what I've learned in all these years, I'm sharing on this podcast, and same is true for Manel. He's been in this for a long time in various different ways. Been a musician forever. Then went the audio way, and all these amazing productions that he's done, and the experience as a musician and as an engineer and producer. We bring this to this podcast so you can learn from that and make better recordings at home in your home studios. Enough of that, though. Mustaches, no. That kind of caught me, like distracted me for a second then that you said that. What happened to your mustache, Manil? If you're watching on YouTube, you can see what we're talking about, by the way.
I know it's always, as you said, it's in and out. Someone told me, it was funny, a couple of weeks ago, that I'm the only person who, every time he sees me, my face is different. Because like I change it a lot and my beard grows quite fast. So I can, play with that.
Yep. You're blessed with a thick beard. I'm not like that, but like I can grow a bit of a mustache. So let's see how well that goes. So from mustaches and like faces, is mustaches the proper word? Like, I don't know.
We're getting into trouble.
Yeah. From that to audio, and I realize we haven't done banter in a long time, but I don't know if there's an interesting story, feel free to just share it. I have been so locked in. Yeah, I haven't left the studio much other than like for working out and seeing my girlfriend and stuff. I'm just and doing things with my kids that I experienced cool things, but nothing extraordinary. That's why there's no banter. I've been just working all the time basically on cool projects. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little anecdote that we can use to connect with today's topic.
Great.
Which is that just right before recording this podcast, I had a rehearsal. And it was the first rehearsal for a project we were working on with an artist. We have a gig with him next week, actually. And I'm the musical director there.
Awesome.
And it was a really nice rehearsal because we arrived at the studio and the studio was, already set up for that. Everyone had his own in-ears and it was all set up. Every single musician, we had a mobile phone that was there in the studio, like not our mobile phones. Like they had 6 or 7 mobile phones there where you could adjust the volume of all the instruments for your monitoring. And so that was really cool because, you can really enjoy the rehearsal and listen to all the mistakes the musicians are doing and take notes and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that leads us into the topic of today's episode.
Yes, it does. Perfect. Yeah, that's a great, but also a great experience, but also can be terrifying or like intimidating. If you hear every single detail and all that. But yeah, great segue into today's topic. So let me start by saying something really important here. This episode I'm aiming to, the goal for me here with this episode is to give you a short, simple, actionable truth about monitoring. And I say truth because we're not going to go super deep into any of these topics. I'm just going to give you the things that I believe to be generally true from my experience and from what everyone else pretty much is agreeing on when you talk to professionals. So if you apply these things, you'll be better off and your mixes will benefit from that and your recordings will benefit from that. But every single topic that we go through here could be its own podcast episode because this is a very wide kind of field where you can go very deep on a lot of things. So, and you're going to hear strong opinions and conflicting advice about some of these things online, which can be confusing and overwhelming. I get it. So people will argue about some of these things. You will see all kinds of weird opinions in forums if you Google stuff. So please know that we are not repeating any of that. This is not us repeating what we found online or somewhere. It's not theory from some post or YouTube videos. It is not a, kind of thing we are assuming or guessing. This is our truth from our experience. And in my case, from having mixed thousands of songs professionally at this point, from having been in countless studios, big and small, with different monitoring systems and having listened to them, from having talked to and learned from so many incredible producers and, friends and peers, some of them Grammy winners, people with platinum records, absolute A-list top-tier professionals, from having talked to and learned from some of the best studio designers and acousticians in the world, and from having built and optimized our own studio spaces and setups, over the last 15 years. But at the end of the day, this is still our perspective. This is still our take on it. It's not the end all be all. There's a lot of subjective things when it comes to monitoring. Some people just like certain things and others don't. And you'll always find the exception. You'll always find some outlier, crazy, successful mix engineer with an untreated room or mixing on a pair of earbuds or something. You will always find these exceptions, and they're doing great work. So there's a lot of subjective stuff that goes into that, but it's still what's generally believed to be true, what is proven, what works for most people, and what we believe in. So yeah, I do believe it is the most helpful way of explaining this and explaining what really matters to anyone new or even intermediate. And I would see this as a checklist, an overview, so you know exactly what you're currently missing. And if you want us to go deeper on any of these specific subtopics, then just let us know anytime, request an episode, and we'll go deeper there. And one more thing, check out our friend Jesko Lohan's website and also the interview that we have with him on the podcast. His name is Jesko Lohan. He's a studio designer, acoustician. He has a website and a pretty popular YouTube channel called Acoustics Insider. I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. I always have to look up if it's Acoustic Insider or I think it's, Acoustics Insider. AcousticSinsider.com. He's awesome. He has great courses, free workshops, blog, a YouTube channel where you can learn all kinds of things about not just acoustics, but monitoring. That's why I'm pointing it out here. But the two go together if you use speakers anyways. So yeah, check out Jesko's stuff. Check out his podcast episode with us. Now, with that out of the way, here we go. Let's start. Like I said, the room and the speakers or headphones are at the top of the gear hierarchy. Nothing else comes even close. So before you think about buying a new, better interface or expensive plugins or let alone like hardware or whatever, make sure that what you're hearing is actually somewhat accurate or is something that you feel comfortable working with. It doesn't have to be super high end, but start there before anything else. And a lot of people just don't do that. And I highly recommend you do because nothing else matters as much. It's the one piece of gear that, like I said, that everything you do will go through no matter what. It's the one filter, the one thing that everything is going to be influenced by, and you want that to be as good as possible. And more than anything, you want it to be something that you can trust, whatever that means in your case. So start there. I would say start with good headphones first, because no room is perfect. And even if you treat your room and even if you have a good room and a decent pair of speakers, most rooms that are not really well designed and really expensive will be very, very problematic. And you can make better detailed decisions in the low end and transients and stereo imaging and all those details on good headphones. And it's going to be at a fraction of the price of a really good room and speakers. So Manel, I know that you are in you have like decent monitoring and all that, but you are not in a purpose-built studio at the moment where you do the most of the work. So I guess you are relying on headphones pretty heavily. Yeah. And I just want to know your experience. Like, I know there are people who can work on affordable monitors in untreated rooms and do just fine, but most will tell me that they, in those cases, prefer headphones for good reason. And so, what's that like for you? Did you notice a difference when you switch to better headphones? Are you using them primarily, or what do you do?
I noticed a difference, especially like the biggest difference I think it was when I changed rooms. Because like years ago I was in my hometown, in my parents' place, in my room, and that room is pretty small, like not super small, but fairly small. So like I remember that when I was recording vocals there, and actually almost all the vocals from my album were recorded there, and you can feel the room in the recordings, like you can hear it, right? But here, for example, this is not a treated room or anything like that, but it's way longer. You know, you can see here that it goes way longer. So when I record vocals, I set up the vocalist singing to that corridor there. So it's night and day. Like you don't feel the reflections from the walls the same way. And also I built myself a panel, and that also helps a lot if you put the panel at the back of the singer. You know, the panel would be here, where I am here, where you can see me, and then the singer would sing into the corridor, and that makes a really, really big difference. So the room first, and also, like I've always had these cheap Mackie monitors. I never changed, but that you also feel the difference from my previous room to this room. I think because of the same reason, because this one goes further away. But in terms of mixing, I've never relied on the speakers. I've always been more headphones guy. And when switching from the previous headphones to these Olo headphones, I've noticed especially the difference in clarity and that I have less problems with the low end now than before. Before, with the previous headphones that were cheaper, I had this issue almost in every mix. I don't know if you remember that the bass and the kick was always too loud and I had to bring it down.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't happen, even though there's also the psychological fact that I know that happened to me before. So maybe that also plays a role there. But I feel like I can get a better sense of all the frequencies with better headphones.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. It's true. So headphones in general, good idea in most DIY rooms, almost like all of them actually. And then if you it's not the more expensive the better, but it is kind of true with headphones. So, and even the most expensive ones, like reasonable kind of, there's always the crazy expensive weird voodoo hi-fi thing. You don't need that. But in the studio, in the serious like studio world, even the most expensive ones are nothing compared to the prices of big monitors and room design and all that. So, and our friends at Olo, which we both obviously use, they have great headphones that are reasonably priced, not the cheapest ones for sure, but also reasonably priced, not crazy expensive, but you get a lot for the money. I can highly recommend them. Quick thing on open versus closed. If you are going to need one pair for everything, like tracking and mixing, you got to go for closed just because then you won't have bleed in the microphone. They are typically not as good for mixing, but if you get good ones, they will do. It will work. If you use them for mixing only, or primarily mixing, then I would go for open just because you'll typically have less distortion, a cleaner, bigger, more true like low end, and they're less fatiguing also to wear for a long time and to work on there for long hours. So mixing open, tracking closed, and if you need one thing for both, then closed or semi-open if you don't have crazy monitor volumes on your ears. So that's that. What to watch out for? Just real quick, as I said, there's a lot to cover, so I won't go very deep here. See it as a checklist. The open and close thing. Then I would say I would recommend going for a flat frequency response unless you really prefer a certain sound in the headphones and can compensate for that. I know that some people like headphones with a low-end boost just because they're missing the feeling of low-end from speakers, and so they like headphones that give them a little more than there actually is just because it feels a little better to them. Other people don't like that at all, so it's of course subjective. I personally think it's a good idea to get something with a pretty flat frequency response. That is just true. I also recommend you get headphone calibration software. So the Olo stuff comes with its own calibration, I think now. And then for all the other models, there's things like SonarWorks that on headphones actually works really, really well. I also use it on speakers, but I think especially on headphones when there's no room in the equation, it works really well to calibrate your headphones. But I would go for flat and just get used to the more boring sound. It's just more honest. And then finally, the impedance and the preamp matters. So just a quick overview. If you get there's different models sometimes of the same headphone with different impedances, like for the Biodynamics, for example, that are very popular. In general, the higher the impedance, typically the cleaner or like slightly better, more detailed the sound is, but also the quieter the headphones are going to be. And the lower the impedance, the louder the headphones will be, which means if you're driving the headphones with a really good headphone amp and you are or using a really good interface that has a good headphone amp built into it, you might get away with a high impedance and it's still loud enough without, a lot of noise and all that. If you're using it on just the laptop, check or something, or you also want to use it to listen on a cheap phone or whatever, where you plug it in directly without a good interface, or just a bad headphone amp, then you might need a lower impedance because they won't be loud enough then if you have a high impedance. So just watch out for that. In general, it's a good idea to have a good headphone amp, and it makes a lot of a difference. Like with many of the very expensive interfaces, they will have good headphone amps. Many of the cheaper ones, not so much. And if you buy an external headphone amp along with your great new headphones, the AB, it's audible. It's definitely audible even to the inexperienced ear. If you have a good pair of headphones and now a crappy amp, and then you buy an external headphone amp that you plug into your interface between the headphones and that, you'll hear the difference. But if it's necessary, it depends on your interface that you have right now. Recommendations: Olo, obviously, because we're both partnering with them, and we only do that because we really like them, and they are great. Not just because they sound great. There's a lot of other cool things about them, so go just check them out at their website. We'll be in the show notes here. And then, and by the way, I'm not getting paid to say this. I got to get a discount on the headphones, but I'm not getting paid to sell any, so feel free to check them out. Other recommendations would be the very popular Sennheiser's HD650. They are still something I can recommend. They don't sound as good to me as the Olos, not at all. They have a pretty weak low end. But they are very, very, very flat, very honest sounding headphones. I'm lacking some of the transients and width and detail and all that compared to the Olos, for example, or compared to like Odysseys or some crazy expensive headphones. But they're still really good for the money, and they are pretty flat, and that's why I recommend them to many beginners. But also the difference in price is not that much compared to like Olos, so you have to decide. But that's a good recommendation. For closed ones, the Beyer DT770s is what I've used for a long time, and it's, I think, the most popular studio headphone, so I don't think you can go wrong with these. They work for tracking. Little different story when it comes to mixing. They're not really flat in terms of frequencies, but tracking, fantastic headphones. And I even mixed records on them and it worked. So they are even cheaper and good all-round headphones, I would say. And then anything by Audio-Technica I can also recommend. And if you want to go really high, then in terms of budget and quality, then Odysseys is going to be, like the Odyssey headphones are going to be my recommendation. I honestly don't hear much of a difference if I compare Thomas's Odysseys, for example, my assistant and studio partner here. He has Odysseys, and if I compare them to my Olos, not that big of a difference. Subjective, preference. You could argue that they're a little more detailed, but they're about as good as it gets in when it comes to studio headphones. So if you have the money for those, definitely can recommend. So yeah, this is the quick headphone part of this. Now on to speakers. Are you using your speakers still for like perspective or other things, Manel? Do you switch to speakers while you're mixing every once in a while?
Yes, I do it to sometimes to check really low volume, and also because sometimes I'm tired and I need a fresh perspective, or I want to feel the song differently while I'm cooking or something like that. I don't know. So yeah, I use them, but they are not mandatory in my process. I could get on without them.
Yeah, as good points there, though. Like sometimes you just want to have things on in the background and double check them, or like see how they translate. I personally rely heavily on my speakers, but also I have really good speakers in a good room. I think for most people, you should still have some pair of speakers, even if you're in a home studio. Not an expensive one at all. Prioritize headphones first. I mean, if you can afford expensive speakers, by all means do it. But even if you can't, get some pair of speakers, just because, for the reasons you just said, Manel, and then just for perspective, and it's also a little less fatiguing if you're working like a long time on things. For example, while you're, maybe some decisions that are not really mission critical you can do on speakers, just for it to be a little less fatiguing, and then for the detailed work you can go back to your headphones. If you're just doing timing edits, you can do those on speakers. If you want to do like more detailed edits, so you hear the artifacts, headphones are much better because you can miss a lot of details on speakers, honestly, in editing. That's a big game changer too for me when I discovered that. That was a big change when I discovered that some of the small little like clicks and noise issues or like edits that were not that clean in the editing process, when I noticed that I sometimes missed them even on my great speakers, but I got all of them on the headphones, that's when I switched to headphones for like very critical editing things. But some things are not like that, and you can just go to speakers just to be less fatigued over time. And then sometimes it just doesn't hurt to check the stereo image on speakers compared to headphones. It's just a little different to see how it translates, So having a pair is not a bad idea at all. If you're going to be serious about speakers, though, then definitely treat your room, I'd say. Even if you got, like I said, you see the odd mixer who's like made an untreated room work, but I would say do a minimum treatment anyways. And start really simple. Like, it's too much to cover for this episode, but in short, prioritize bass traps and low frequency management, because every room is bad at that, and it's you can't overdo it. Start with corners, and so because of that, for the low frequency stuff, and then treat the early reflections. So behind your speakers, left and right of you on the walls, and directly above you. This is going to be the first reflection points. They are most important. The back of the room is less important. So start there, and with the corners for low end. The thicker, the better when it comes to absorbers, because the thicker it is, the more low end you're gonna be treating, and low end is always problematic. It's way easier to treat top end and mid range than it is to treat low end. So the thicker the better. And then a couple of things. Thin foam is bullshit, and egg rates are the worst kind of bullshit. So don't even do that unless you want your studio to burn down really quickly. So don't do that. And then and no matter what you see online, it's just bullshit. And there is some foam, there is some good acoustic foam, but it's usually thicker, it's really expensive, and all the thin pyramid foam, whatever stuff, it just screams amateur, and most products just don't work. The easiest and also cheapest thing, by the way, to do is to build your absorbers with rock wool and a wooden frame and fabric on top of it, and go with the thicker, the better. But there's an entire episode on that with Jesko, and so much material online, and Jesko's entire website and all of that, so go there. And also, if you are working with us inside of our coaching, we'll help you optimize your room. We run a bunch of tests, and we help you design that, and that's going to be part of that too. So then that is out of the way.
One little question. What can happen? Can you give us some examples of what can happen if you don't treat your room?
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you don't treat the room, what happens is, first of all, you're going to have low end. Sorry, my voice is trash today. You're going to have low end buildups. That's the most common problem in most rooms, in every room, basically. I have a fly on my face. So was that there? Is it the same one that was there last week? Is it still in my studio? Last week
I don't think they last 1 week.
I don't think so either. Anyway.
Maybe it's the child.
Yeah, that could be the case. Anyway, so yeah, low end build up, and what that means is that your room is gonna have too much. Like, you're gonna hear more low end than there actually is in your mixes, which results in weak low end in your mixes, because you think you have enough when it's actually not enough. It's just your room playing tricks on you, because you're hearing a pretty boomy full low end, and also you're going to hear much more importantly, you're not going to hear an even low end. You're going to hear certain notes that are very loud and others will be pretty quiet, and you will try to compensate in your mix, and then it doesn't translate, and certain bass notes will pop out, or the kick drum will be lost, or the kick drum will be way too loud and boomy, or whatever. So depending on whether you're hearing cancellation or an addition of certain frequencies in your room, it's just going to be problematic to get the low end right. Let's just say that. And so that is one thing. The other thing with the early reflections is the sound of your speakers will arrive at your ear, and also it will move to the walls behind the speakers, the ceiling above you, and the walls left and right of you, and then arrive at your ears shortly after. Like almost at the same time as the direct sound from the speakers when it comes to the first reflection points. It's going to be very quick, a very, very short delay, which means that your brain cannot tell that it's two different things. It just hears the direct sound and the reflections pretty much at the same time. And then certain frequencies will add up, others will cancel. It will just blend them into the sound you're hearing. And so you're not hearing what your speakers are actually doing. You're hearing that plus whatever comes back from the closed walls, which is going to mess up what's going on, and you're going to not hear the truth. The stuff way behind you, further away, it will take longer for that to arrive at your ears because there's multiple reflections and it just travels longer through the room. And so it also matters. But if it's long enough, if the delay is big enough, our brain can actually detect that as a delay, as a room sound. And then it can differentiate between the direct sound and that other stuff. And it's easier for us to like separate that, and it doesn't blend with the direct sound you're hearing. So it's still going to be something you want to treat eventually, but first get the early stuff out of the way, the immediate stuff around you. So if you don't do that, you're going to hear you're not going to hear the truth. You're going to hear a mix of the direct sound and the reflections. That's the main reason. And then the low end thing. And if you don't do it properly, if you go too thin with the absorbers, or you just buy cheap foam or anything like that, what will happen, or if you don't treat the corners with bass traps, what's going to happen is you're going to eliminate some of the top end and maybe the upper mid-range or maybe the mid-range, depending on how thick they are. But there's nothing is going to be happening to the low end and even the low mid-range, which means it might sound more controlled. You might hear like less reverb, or it will sound like that to you. But the low end will be unchanged because bass doesn't care about thin absorbers. And so what you're now hearing is a duller version of your room, which again means you're not hearing what's going on. You're hearing too much low end, too much low mid-range, and not enough top end anymore. And then your mixes might end up being harsh. And so you want to go very thick with absorbers and treat the low end and the mid-range as well, so that you reduce the overall reverb in the room and not just the reverb in the top end and mid-range. So that's what's going on. But yeah, that was actually almost way too much for this episode, but there you go. But before you do any of that, it all starts with finding the best position in the room, because it really matters. And it should be done before you finalize the room treatment. I don't know if you have you experimented much with that, Manel? Like figuring out where you actually sit in the room, where you put the speakers, how far they are apart, the angle, how far you are away from the wall, stuff like that.
I don't have much space to experiment.
And you rely on headphones mostly anyways.
To be honest. So yeah, the only thing that I've tried is the angle of the speakers, but I didn't notice any crazy big difference.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You're relying on headphones anyways. But like again, if you're serious about speakers, or if you have room to move, it's definitely worth trying that. Also, desk reflections matter. So for example, I swapped out desks here at the beginning of the year. I changed from my old bigger desk to this one. Shout out to Session Desk. I love the new desk. And it's a smaller desk, a different angle, and all those things. And just switching desks made a big difference in my monitoring. It was better, but it was not only that it was better, it was just way different. And I had to measure everything again. I had to recalibrate my SonarWorks and all kinds of things just because the old curve didn't work anymore. Same position of everything, same speakers, same room. It's just a different desk, and everything fell apart. So it matters. And also, if you move away from the wall, closer to the wall, if you increase the distance to the speakers, the distance between the speakers, it makes a lot of difference. And you want to experiment with that and do some tests before you treat the room, because you want to optimize the position in the room first. Every room's different. It depends on the dimensions. Again, in our coaching, we walk people through that. There's calculators for that. And there's also a really cool video and blog post by Jesko about that positioning topic. So you will find it on his website if you search for it. But definitely start there. It really matters. And then the next thing, which you'll find conflicting information out there and people disagreeing with that, but from my experience, it's absolutely true, and from talking to a lot of people as well. Bigger speakers are better if they are the same quality, even in smaller rooms. So you'll hear a lot of people say, well, I have a small room, or you have a small room, so you shouldn't get the big version of the speakers, you should get the smaller ones. You know, for example, by some companies like Adam or Yamaha, or some of the entry-level or mid-level kind of speaker manufacturers, you'll see the same speaker with 5-inch drivers and 7-inch drivers or 8-inch drivers. It's basically the same speaker, just bigger and smaller versions. As long as they are the same quality, same components and all of that, the bigger ones are better, even in smaller rooms. It's just that if you can't afford the bigger ones, then in a smaller room, it might be okay to go with the smaller one, or the other way around. if the room is bigger and your distance to the speakers is bigger, you definitely need the bigger ones. But it doesn't mean that the bigger ones are bad in small rooms. They're almost always better. Because with bigger speakers, you'll get a couple of things. You'll get less distortion because the speaker has more headroom, more power usually. So you don't have to turn them up as loud. The speaker will be more relaxed. You don't get speaker distortion. You'll have more headroom in the amp of the speaker. It's just going to work. It's just going to have to work less hard, which is going to sound cleaner, lower noise, lower distortion, everything. You're going to have bigger low end, even on quieter volumes. It's just going to go lower. Small speakers just don't go very low, and you're going to miss some of the subs. And there is no disadvantage to that. Like, the room is the room. It's going to be problematic anyways. And a bigger speaker is just going to be a cleaner, bigger, better representation. Not bigger, but a cleaner, more true representation of what's going on. And so if I'm missing anything here and you're listening to this and you're an expert and you call bullshit, please tell me. I'd like to be educated. But from my experience, what I've heard so far from people I've talked to, from my own tests, bigger always was better in terms of speakers. I've never had it where I was like, oh, the smaller speaker is actually better in this room. But I might be wrong. But that's just a recommendation that I'm pretty sure will work for you. Anything to add to that, Manel? I know this is already turning into a big monologue again, just because I prepared the episode. But and you are mixing on headphones primarily. But I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions or ideas to add to this.
I don't have much to add, to be honest. I would like to have good monitors.
Yeah,
oh my God. Monitors in the future. I mean, I'm thinking about moving somewhere else and build my studio there and build a room to my needs. So I would definitely think about getting a pair of decent monitors. So I guess you are gonna go into this, but what would be your recommendations in terms of monitors?
Yeah, that would have been the next point. Good question. Again, I have not heard every single monitor pair on this planet, so I can only talk from my experience. And I won't even recommend stuff that I haven't listened to, even though it's popular or might be good. I will only recommend stuff I know. But I've listened to lots of them. And there are a couple that stood out to me in the last couple of years. So one thing I need to say is there's one very subjective thing when it comes to monitors, and that's the general philosophy behind the build. There's different approaches to building monitors. So, and different philosophies to the components that people use. And the biggest one to me is, or the two biggest ones are, there are closed monitors with no, they are not ported. There's no port in there, in the hole in the speakers for more like a better bass response. And then there are ported speakers with the hole. And that difference means any normal-sized speaker in a studio will be too small to reproduce the super low subs. Like without a subwoofer, without a really big driver, you just cannot reproduce 30 hertz, 40 hertz properly, that kind of stuff. But in sometimes not even 50 or 60. And so if you want to go low like that, which you kind of need to be able to, have an opinion on kick drums and low bass stuff, you're going to either have to have really, really big speakers or additional subwoofers to speakers. Or you want to have ported speakers because they will extend the frequency response into the subs so that the speakers can reproduce lower frequencies than what would actually be possible based on the sheer speaker size and surface. And so that's the advantage. The downside is, though, that a port will have a resonance and then a pretty steep drop-off below that, the extension. So the very subs will going to be even weaker compared to non-ported speakers, and there's going to be a resonance, and typically the low-end response is not going to be as even. So pick your poison. If you have like a closed speaker without the port, the low-end response will be a little more even, more accurate, and it will drop off gradually and not as steep, and you won't get the resonance, but you're not going to go as low in general. So the speaker needs to be even bigger. Or you have something like the Yamaha NS10, the classic white cone studio speaker that you see in so many studios. Not the newer ones, not the HS5s and HS8s, whatever. The classic NS10s, like the old ones that are not being built anymore. There's just clones of them. They are not ported and small, but people don't use them because of the low end. They barely have any low end. They use them as like mid-range, laser-focused, mid-range machines, basically. So you can still mix on them without subwoofers if you know what to listen for, but you kind of have to imagine the low end because it's not really there. But they are really, really, really honest in the mid-range, and they don't give you any like weird resonances, and they are, for a reason, very popular. But just, you got to make the decision, ported or non-ported. Do you want the low end or not? Do you need to feel it? So that's the one thing. The other thing is subwoofer or not. I personally like subwoofers if they are matched with the speakers very well. The crossover needs to be right and all. That's more difficult to do than you think. It's not difficult to do, but most people just set them up wrongly. You know, the sub needs to take over where the speaker is kind of falling short, and then it needs to be tuned accurately to become one system. If it doesn't, it's overlapping. You get all kinds of weird issues. But subwoofers are great. My personal opinion is, if I would use subwoofers, I would get 2 and monitor in stereo, because one subwoofer means that you're hearing the low end in mono. And so if there's a phase or image issue between left and right, you just don't hear it. I mean, you would hear phase issues, but you wouldn't hear the left and right difference. And I just like to hear everything in stereo all the way down. That's why mastering studios have 2 subwoofers or big speakers. In my case, I just have really big speakers, or like not really big, but pretty big speakers with 2 7-inch drivers. They go down really low. I don't need subwoofers. I hear the low end just fine. Like, they have two 7-inch drivers per speaker, so they are midfield monitors. Yeah, but personal preference. Many people don't use subwoofers, others do. Both can work. If you can, I would go with 2 subwoofers though, and then you treat them properly. And then the third thing is the driver type when it comes to top-end drivers, because the mid-range and top-end drivers are very important for transient clarity, for detecting harshness, also mid-range details. And so there are many different ways of building these, but to me, the 2 that I always compare are the ribbon drivers that you'll find in Atom speakers, or the head speakers, HEDD, or like I think Eve Audio also uses that kind of thing. It's the yellow ribbon thing that you see on the Atom speakers, versus a more traditional looking round kind of small speaker driver. And there are different ways of building these, but that's just the generalization here. And I personally love the ribbon tweeters, the Atom Audio and head and all those kind of speakers tweeters. I know that some people, like many people, don't like them. They find them fatiguing or harsh or too bright. I enjoy it. I am not mixing at very loud volumes. I like the detail that I get of them. And if it's not harsh on those, it's definitely not harsh anywhere else. To me, at least, I just like it. And I know that there are many people who like it, and just as many who don't like it. You gotta listen and try for yourself. Just try, because it is a difference, and you don't want to end up with speakers that you find fatiguing. So now to the to the precise recommendations. So if you, first of all, I would say listen and test speakers. Go to a music store somewhere, or order a couple pairs if you can send them back, and ideally listen in your own environment. That's going to be the best situation. You never want to buy speakers without having tested them first, because it's highly subjective. It needs to work with your room, and so many variables. So if you end up liking the ribbon tweeters, then I can absolutely recommend Atom Audio monitors. I can also recommend head monitors, HEDD. They are kind of a not more modern, but like a different approach to the same kind of philosophy. I think they are developed by the same people, or people who used to be at Atom now do head. I think I might be wrong about this one, but they're similar in philosophy, and I've heard them both. And the nice thing about the head monitors is that you can, with some of them, maybe with all of them, you can switch them from ported to closed. You can close the ports and make them sealed, or you can remove the plug and make them ported, and you can have both in one speaker, and it works really well. And I've heard them, and they are phenomenal. And honestly, as much as I love Atom, and I've been using mine for a long time, I am considering switching to head monitors in the future, because I already like the general concept, and to me it was an improvement on my Atom audios. But also, mine are 12 years old, and the newer Atoms, I'm sure, are much better than mine. So I'm not, I don't want to shit talk Atom. They are great, but head has really been interesting to me. And then our friends in Kali Audio, who have visited in LA, we've bought a pair of these for the B room here, for Thomas's room, and I absolutely love them. And I've listened to their entire range of speakers, and even their most expensive ones are not that crazy expensive. And I think Kali speakers, to me, have been the most impressive when it comes to value price kind of ratio. So for the money, they are absolutely incredible, and not just for the money, they are really, really good in general. And I was super surprised how much I liked them. And we got like mid-level Kalis here in the B room. Awesome, I love them. Every time I walk in there and I hear Thomas work on them, I'm like, wow, that mid-range is so clear, even compared to my much more expensive speakers. And their top-of-the-line speakers have blown me away when I heard them at their headquarters. So Kali Audio can definitely recommend. And then others that stood out to me that I liked were the Ex Machinas, which are really pretty expensive. But they're just high-end speakers, and I was just very much impressed by them. I think you heard those at the Studio Szene, Manel. Maybe not.
Maybe. I don't remember.
Yeah. Anyways, but I heard him a couple times now, and I really liked them. So links will be in the show notes, of course. I'm not sponsored by any of these, so you can just compare. And then finally, what else comes to mind is, and I'm probably missing some, so sorry if that's the case, but those are just the ones that stood out to me. And then finally, I can always recommend Neumann monitors. A couple of friends, Malcolm included, my previous co-host here, uses them. Very good monitors. I think the KH310s, is that the name? I might be wrong here, but like the Neumann 3-way monitors, phenomenal. Can absolutely recommend. Also reasonably priced. None of those are like super crazy expensive. And then in the high-end kind of area, but still reasonably priced for that, is ATC. This is the other one company that I'm thinking about upgrading to. It is really pricey. I mean, not really if you consider what you're getting, but it is a lot of money. And they need to be tuned to the room really well, or the room needs to be tuned for the speakers, more or less. It's a better way of saying it. But every room with ATCs that I've been in was really, really mind-blowingly good. So, yeah, to sum it up, Adams, Head, if you like the ribbon tweeters, those two. Then Kalis in general, especially if you're on a budget, but not just then. Just great monitors and great people behind the company as well. Neumann's, Ex Machina, and ATCs in the high end. Those are, from my personal experience, the ones that I really enjoyed.
One question, now that you mentioned do you think about opening and closing the...
Mm-hmm.
How do you call that again?
The port.
Yeah.
Opening and closing the port.
Okay. Yeah. I saw this Spanish producer who went to a studio and used socks and put them on the port.
On the holes. Mm-hmm.
On the holes. So I did at some point years ago. What do you think about it? Like, is it because that's to tame the low end, right?
Yeah,
that's the
yeah. I know that some people do it. I haven't tried it myself, honestly. I have no experience that I can talk about, but I can imagine that it works depending on how sealed it actually is when you do that. And if the speaker is designed to still perform when you do that. I imagine that there must be something about the speaker design that works with that, but I'm not 100% sure about this at all. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, worth trying. You only know if you try sometimes. And if you have a measurement mic and like a software like REW, Room EQ Wizard, which is free, you can just do measurements and see if it improves or gets worse when you do it, and then you know. I know. So yeah, no, it's a concept that I'm aware of, but I have never tried it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and I always feel kind of weird about these recommendations because, again, there's probably an incredible company that I have not recommended now. I also don't get paid for any of these. I just share my experience. But I just know that with any of the ones that I just mentioned, you will not be disappointed. You will be happy with all of them. It's just personal preference. But again, I feel kind of bad for all the companies that I don't mention in these recommendations, but it's just I haven't heard every single speaker in the world, and those are just the ones that stood out to me, so take it as what it is. So then the interfaces, And converters. So they matter, but not as much as the headphone amp matters, for example. So I just want to say real quick, if you have a really terrible converter and you buy a super high-end speaker, probably also upgrade the converter. If you have a Focusrite Scarlett and then you buy $20,000 ATCs, maybe also invest a little bit in a better interface. But in general, it's not as important. It matters, but it's not that important. I just want to say that. So a normal kind of interface will work with most speakers, but if you go high end, then go high end on the entire chain, I'd say. Set them up properly, like I said, to get the most out of your speakers. This is also true for headphones, by the way. So like I said before, the position in the room, but then also the angle, the height, all of that matters when it comes to speakers. Do that first. Position them properly. Start with what's it called? What do you call the triangle with where the distance is the same for equilateral okay. Triangle. That's what I was looking for. Equilateral triangle. Start there, and then try to increase and decrease the distance between the speakers until you find your sweet spot. And the sweet spot is something you can feel more than you can hear it. The sweet spot to me, and again, Jesko has a way better way of explaining that in his on his website, but to me, when I have the feeling that there's a third speaker in the middle that is not actually there, where I can hear the center of the image so precisely in front of me that it feels like I can grab it, it's like a third speaker, that's a good sign. If the image is kind of wonky and not really right in front of me and not very precise, I try to increase or decrease the distance until it feels perfect in the center between the speakers. And then the other thing is that the low end is kind of a thing too, where if the low end feels really soft and boomy, and it of course that depends on the room too, then I typically change something about that, and I think something's wrong with it. If the low end is pretty tight and feels controlled, and you can hear the individual bass notes better, then the distance between the speakers is probably right. So it's more a feeling thing and a personal preference thing than it is something that can be measured, but it matters. Yeah. So that, and then with the headphones, I don't know, Mandel, have you ever tried this? If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see what I'm doing. Have you ever tried this versus this, or just a tiny movement, or this versus this when you're mixing? Like what I just did is I moved my headphones in various different ways. And when I put the headphones on for mixing, I always now, because I didn't in the past, I now always make sure that I have them on the same way, because it's easy to just twist the cans a tiny little bit in one direction or the other, or to have, the, what's it called? The
thing you think.
The thing that connects the two cans left and right, to have that a little more on your, like towards your forehead, like the back of your head, And the funny thing is, if you do that, it completely changes everything. Like it doesn't sound the same at all. And if you've ever done that, and if you've never done that, please do it. And then stick to one position, because if you start the mix one way, then you do a break, take a break, you come back and put the headphones on differently, you're going to question your mix, or you're going to make bad decisions. So it really matters how you put on your headphones. It's actually funny. When I discovered that, I was like, oh my God, I've never paid attention. I probably, messed it up. But yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't been experimenting with the different positions, but I always try to have the headphones in the same position.
Yeah. Good. And then the final thing here is getting used to your system is more important than having the perfect system. So whatever you're using, headphones or speakers, if you're using something somewhat decent, like not the cheapest stuff, not the most expensive high-end stuff, something that you can afford that's decent and kind of showing you the truth. What matters much more than upgrading is listening to a lot of music on those and getting to know the sound of it, because you want to be familiar with it. You want to know what music typically sounds like on those speakers, how the low end behaves, or the headphones, whatever, how the low end behaves, what the stereo image is like, how bright things are, what the transients sound like. You really need to study that, and you need to do it a lot so that your brain learns it and you just subconsciously know what's going on. If you don't do that, you'll have no chance, because you need that internal reference. It's like a lot of people will spend a lot of time listening to music on their earbuds or in the car or on the stereo, whatever, but not on their studio system where they mix. They only listen to their own stuff there. And if you do that, you will have no internal reference. Your body and your brain will not have learned and internalized what things are supposed to sound like there. And so you need to spend time just listening to a lot of music, if you like that or not. But you need to sit down and just listen and study your monitoring system. That's going to do much more for you than upgrading, actually. And even if you upgrade, you're going to have to go through the same process again and relearn it. And so that's why, by the way, you'll see these producers and mixers use weird systems or earbuds or untreated rooms and still make great records, because they spend so much time in there listening to so many recordings and mixes and music that they just know it. It might sound terrible to everyone else, but they just know it in and out. And that's why they can make great records there. Yeah.
And that's also why headphones are very practical, because
Yep.
you can almost listen to pretty much exactly the same way in a different place, right? So.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yep. If you mix on headphones, I recommend you take them with you when you go on vacation, you're traveling in the train, whatever. To just keep listening to music on those mixing headphones, because you'll learn it and you'll learn what things sound like. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And then maybe I said the final thing, but yeah, this is not really the final thing. And this is like the difference between speakers and headphones. Just real quick. You're gonna mix differently on speakers compared to headphones. And there's a couple of pitfalls around this. And there's like the most common thing is that the stereo image is going to be different. So most people, when they mix on headphones, a very common thing is they'll mix the center of the image too loud. So kick, snare, bass, vocal, everything that's center is often too loud in headphone mixes, because the speakers are directly attached to your ears when you mix on headphones. And everything that's happening on the sides, you're going to hear very precisely, so you won't turn it up as loud. On speakers, that's not the case, and you turn up the sides louder because it's not directly, the left and right is not as clear. And so on headphones, you have to turn up the sides louder than you think you need to, in many cases, for it to be a balanced, even mix. So that is a very common thing. Damn, fly in my face again. That's a very common thing that just happens on headphones. And so I just want to leave you with that, so you can compensate, or you can double check your mixes if you're mixing in headphones. If you find your vocals, your kick, your snare, and your bass, everything that's center, to be too loud oftentimes, that might be the headphone issue, and you just got to get used to turning up the sides, even though you hear them clearly on your headphones. Yeah. So that's the monitoring episode. I know every single one of these topics, we could go a lot deeper, I know, but I wanted to give you the overview. And I think if you just go through all of that and implement the stuff you haven't implemented yet, and you'll be better off. And if you want us to go deeper on any of the bullet points that we went through today, just let us know. You got anything to add, Manel?
Not really, to be honest.
I always feel so bad for these solo episodes when you are there. But then again, I kind of like it. I really like it when you're there anyways. But I also like it on these episodes because you act as like my bullshit detector. So if I just look at you while I'm talking, I can sometimes tell if there's maybe something off, I'm missing something, I can ask you questions in between. And then obviously I value your expertise and all that. But sometimes there are episodes where I just prepare them and I just blast through my notes and you don't say much, and I kind of feel bad about it, but I still prefer you being here.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm fine with this. Like, this is a lesson for me, and I can ask weird questions. And I believe that part of our audience would be, asking the same questions to you if they were here. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. Awesome, man. I appreciate you being here as always. And thank you for listening. If you think that all of that is overwhelming and you would like help with setting up your studio and all the acoustics treatment and the monitoring setup and the running the tests and measuring it and all those kind of things, go to the selfrecordingband.com and apply for coaching, because we do that as part of the program, and we don't do it. I don't do all of that. I can bring in specialists if I'm not the best expert at something. We have guest workshops and lessons in there with Jesko, who I mentioned multiple times on this episode. He did one for our coaching community as well. And so we do whatever we can to help you set up your room. It's one of the first things I do with people who I onboard into the coaching is I look at their setups and I discover all the things that is wrong about their speakers. I see that they positioned the speakers way too high or too close together or in a weird angle, or maybe they have crappy monitoring to begin with, or the room is set up in a weird way. I'll notice that immediately and help them fix it. That's the first thing we do. And so if you want a professional to look at your setup and help you do that, go to the selfrecordingband.com and apply, and then look at your application. And if you're a good fit, we will reach out and let you know. And then we'll do a free call with you and create your own custom plan. And only if you approve that, we will work together. If not, we will just part ways and nothing happens. So, yeah. And if you just want to have someone do the work in general for you, and you don't even have to worry about your own setup, you just want to be a musician, hit up Manel, because he's an awesome producer and he will turn your phone demo into a fully produced song, and then you can let him worry about the headphones and the monitoring.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.